Marcus Webb felt every eye in the reunion ballroom burning into him as Brandon Westbrook announced to the crowd that he was just a broke mechanic who'd never amount to anything. 6 months later, when the midnight blue Rolls Royce pulled up to their charity gala, and Marcus stepped out as the man with a $2 million scholarship fund in his name, those same eyes couldn't look away. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, sliding through the mail slot of Marcus Webb's modest apartment with all the subtlety of a death sentence. 20 years, 2 decades since he'd walked the halls of Riverside Prep, since he'd worn the invisible uniform of the scholarship kid, the boy who didn't belong. The cream-colored cardstock felt expensive between his fingers, embossed with gold lettering that practically screamed exclusivity. Class of 2005 reunion, black tie optional. He almost laughed at that last part. Nothing was ever truly optional at Riverside Prep. His daughter Emma looked up from her homework at the kitchen table, her 10-year-old eyes sharp with the kind of perception that came from growing up too fast. She had her mother's eyes, that same warm brown that could see straight through to your soul, and right now they were seeing the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw had tightened. "What's that, Dad?" she asked, her pencil hovering over a math problem about fractions that seemed infinitely more manageable than the fractured pieces of his past. "Nothing important, sweetheart, just some junk mail." He moved to throw it in the recycling bin, but Emma was already up, her small hand catching his wrist with surprising strength. "It doesn't look like junk mail." She plucked the invitation from his fingers before he could protest, her eyes scanning the words. "A reunion? That's cool. Are you going to go?" Marcus felt something twist in his chest. How could he explain to his daughter that the people at that reunion, the ones who would be showing off their corner office views and their vacation homes in the Hamptons, were the same ones who had made his life a living hell, that they had nicknamed him Scholarship Webb as if his poverty was a punchline, that the worst of them, Brandon Westbrook and his pack of entitled wolves, had done everything in their power to remind him daily that he didn't belong in their world? "I don't think so, baby. Daddy's got work that weekend." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, but it was easier than the truth. Emma's face fell, and he saw the disappointment there. The same look she got when he had to miss one of her school plays because he was working a double shift. Ever since her mother died 3 years ago, he'd seen that look far too often. Cancer had taken Sarah swiftly and mercilessly, leaving him alone with a grief so vast it threatened to swallow him whole, and a 7-year-old girl who needed him to be strong enough for both of them. "But you always say we should face our fears," she said quietly, setting the invitation on the table between them like evidence in a trial. "You always tell me that running away doesn't solve anything." He wanted to tell her that this was different, that there was a difference between childhood fears of monsters under the bed and the very real monsters who wore expensive suits and measured your worth by the size of your bank account. But she was looking at him with such earnest belief, such pure faith in the man she thought he was, that the words died in his throat. "You're right," he said finally, pulling her into a hug that was as much for him as it was for her. "You're absolutely right." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Maybe I will go, just for a little while." The truth was, Marcus Webb had nothing to show for the last 20 years. Nothing that would impress the Brandon Westbrooks of the world anyway. He worked as a mechanic at Joe's Auto Repair, his hands permanently stained with grease that no amount of scrubbing could completely remove. His apartment was small, a 1-bedroom where Emma got the bedroom and he slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. His car was a 15-year-old sedan that he kept running through sheer willpower and mechanical know-how, held together with replacement parts and prayers. He had exactly one suit purchased from a discount store for Sarah's funeral, and it hung in his closet like a black ghost, a reminder of the worst day of his life. He had no impressive job title, no vacation photos from exotic locations, no stories about closing big deals or climbing corporate ladders. What he had was Emma and a bone-deep exhaustion that came from working 60-hour weeks just to keep them afloat, and a pride that refused to let him give up no matter how hard things got. That night, after Emma was asleep, Marcus sat on his pull-out couch in the darkness of the living room, the invitation resting on the coffee table in front of him. The television was on, muted, casting flickering blue light across the small space. He thought about Brandon Westbrook, about the casual cruelty that came so easily to people who had never known what it meant to go without. He thought about the time Brandon had dumped a cafeteria tray on his head in front of the entire school, about the laughter that had followed him down the hallway like a pack of hyenas. He thought about prom night when he'd finally worked up the courage to ask Jessica Martinez, only to have Brandon offer her a ride in his father's Mercedes. She'd said yes without even looking back at Marcus standing there with his borrowed tuxedo and his dreams crumbling around him. But he also thought about Emma's words, "Face your fears. Don't run away." She believed in him with a fierceness that terrified him because he knew how easy it would be to disappoint her, to prove that he was exactly what Brandon Westbrook had always said he was. Nobody. Nothing. A scholarship kid who would amount to exactly zero. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He could RSVP no, delete the email, throw away the invitation, and forget the whole thing. Emma would forgive him eventually. She always did, but something stopped him, some stubborn kernel of pride that had survived 20 years of being beaten down. Maybe it was the memory of Sarah, who had believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. Maybe it was the look in his daughter's eyes. Or maybe Just maybe, it was the tiny voice in the back of his mind that wondered what would happen if he showed up. Not to prove anything to Brandon Westbrook or the others, but to prove something to himself, that he had survived, that he was still standing, that he was a good father, a good man, even if he didn't have the fancy car or the impressive title. His finger touched the screen. He navigated to the reunion website, found the RSVP form, and before he could talk himself out of it, he selected yes for one guest. The confirmation email arrived instantly, cheerful and oblivious to the weight of what he'd just done. He set the phone down and leaned back against the couch, his heart pounding as if he'd just committed to something far more dangerous than a simple high school reunion. In the darkness, he whispered to the ghost of his wife, "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Sarah. I hope you'd be proud of me." The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. No answer came, but he hadn't expected one. Sarah was gone, and he was alone with his choices and his fears and a daughter who believed he could do anything. The next morning, Marcus woke before dawn as he always did, his body trained by years of early shifts at the garage. He made coffee in the ancient percolator that had been Sarah's grandmother's, the rich smell filling the small kitchen. He packed Emma's lunch, checked her homework, and laid out her clothes for school. By the time she stumbled out of her bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes, he had breakfast ready. Scrambled eggs, slightly burned the way she liked them, and toast cut into triangles. They ate in comfortable silence, the morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. Marcus watched his daughter, marveling as he did every day at how much she looked like Sarah, how she had the same gestures, the same tilt of her head when she was thinking. She was his entire world, this small, fierce person who had made him want to be better than he was. "Did you RSVP?" Emma asked suddenly, looking up from her eggs with those knowing eyes. Marcus felt his chest tighten. "I did. Last night. I'm going to the reunion." Emma's face lit up with a smile so bright it could have powered the entire apartment building. "That's so great, Dad. I'm proud of you." She got up from her chair and hugged him, her skinny arms wrapping around his neck. "You're the bravest person I know." He held her close, this miracle of a child who somehow saw him as a hero when he felt like anything but. "If only you knew, baby girl. If only you knew how scared I am." But he didn't say that. Instead, he kissed her forehead and said, "I love you, Emma, more than anything in this world." After he dropped Emma at school, Marcus drove to Joe's auto repair, the morning traffic heavy and slow. The garage sat on a corner lot in a part of town that the Riverside prep crowd would never venture into, surrounded by chain-link fencing and the constant smell of motor oil. Joe himself, a bear of a man with a gray beard and hands like dinner plates, was already there. The bay doors opened to the cool morning air. "Marcus Webb," Joe called out, wiping his hands on a rag that had long ago given up any hope of being clean. "You're looking contemplative this morning." That's a 50-cent word. "Something on your mind?" Marcus pulled on his coveralls, the familiar weight settling on his shoulders like armor. "Got a high school reunion coming up, 20 years. Joe whistled low, a sound that carried both sympathy and understanding. 20 years. That's a lifetime. You going? Marcus grabbed a wrench from the toolbox, feeling the solid weight of it in his palm. "Yeah, my daughter convinced me. Said I should face my fears." "Smart kid," Joe said, moving to the car they'd be working on that morning. A Honda with a transmission that sounded like it was grinding itself to death. "So what are you afraid of?" Marcus slid under the car and the creeper, the familiar darkness underneath the chassis somehow comforting. "That they'll see I'm exactly who they always said I was. Nobody. Just a mechanic with grease under his fingernails and nothing to show for 20 years. There was a long pause. Then Joe's voice came from above, thoughtful and measured. "You know what I see when I look at you, Marcus? I see a man who shows up every single day. A man who's raising a good kid on his own. A man who could have let his grief destroy him when his wife died, but instead he got up every morning and kept going. That's not nobody. That's a man with more spine than most of the rich idiots who will probably be at your Marcus felt something warm and tight in his chest. "Thanks, Joe. Don't thank me. Just don't let those bastards make you forget who you are." Joe's boots moved away and then came back. "And Marcus, if you need the day off to get ready, to do whatever you need to do, you take it. Consider it paid." Marcus rolled out from under the car, looking up at his boss with surprise. "Joe, I can't. We're already behind on jobs." Joe waved a massive hand dismissively. "We're always behind. That's the nature of the business. But you've worked for me for 8 years and you've never taken a sick day, never complained, never asked for anything. Take the damn day. Get yourself ready. Face those ghosts of yours." The kindness in the gesture nearly undid him. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak without his voice breaking. Joe understood. He'd been through his own wars, his own losses. He knew what it cost to keep standing when everything in you wanted to fall down. That evening, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He went shopping, not at the discount store where he usually bought Emma's clothes and the bare necessities, but at a real men's store downtown, the kind with a doorman and soft lighting and sales associates who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. He felt like an imposter the moment he walked through the door, the bells chiming his arrival like an alarm. A young man in a perfectly tailored suit approached him, his smile professional but not unkind. "Good evening, sir." "How can I help you today?" Marcus resisted the urge to turn around and walk out. "I need a suit for a formal event." The words felt foreign in his mouth, like he was speaking a language he'd only read in books but never practiced. The sales associate, whose name tag read Devon, looked him over with an assessing eye that was neither judgmental nor dismissive. It was the look of a professional taking measurements, calculating possibilities. "Excellent. Let's get you fitted properly. Do you have a budget in mind?" Marcus thought about his checking account, about the careful calculations he did every month to make sure Emma had everything she needed. He thought about the emergency fund he'd been building, dollar by painful dollar, in case something happened to the car or the apartment, or if Emma got sick. "Something reasonable," he said finally. "I'm not looking to break the bank." Devon nodded, and Marcus saw something shift in his expression. A flicker of respect, maybe, or recognition. "Let me show you some options. We have an excellent selection that won't require you to take out a second mortgage." For the next hour, Marcus tried on suits. Devon moved around him like a tailor from another era, pulling and adjusting, commenting on fit and fall and drape. He brought out shirts in shades of blue and white, ties in subtle patterns, shoes that Marcus would never in a million years have picked for himself, but that Devon insisted were essential. When Marcus saw the price tags, he nearly walked out 3 times. But Devon seemed to sense his hesitation and kept steering him toward options that were nice but not astronomical. "This one," Devon said finally, standing back to assess Marcus in a charcoal gray suit that fit him like it had been made for his body. "This is the one. It's classic, timeless, and it fits you perfectly. You look like a man who has his life together." Marcus looked at himself in the 3-way mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. The suit transformed him. It hid the calluses on his hands, the permanent grease stains, the exhaustion that lived in his bones. He looked successful. He looked like someone who belonged at a Riverside prep reunion. The illusion was so complete it was almost frightening. "I'll take it," he said before he could change his mind. At the register, as Devon rang up the suit, the shirt, the tie, and the shoes, Marcus felt his stomach twist. The total was more than he'd spent on clothes in the last 5 years combined. But he handed over his credit card, watching the numbers climb on the display, and told himself it was an investment. Not in impressing people who didn't matter, but in proving to himself that he could walk back into that world without flinching. As he was leaving, Devon caught his arm. "Hey," he said, his voice lower, more personal. "I don't know what event you're going to, but you're gonna knock them dead. Trust me." He smiled, and Marcus saw something genuine there. "Good luck." Marcus drove home with the suit hanging carefully in the back seat, protected by a garment bag that probably cost more than his first car. He felt both ridiculous and strangely hopeful, like a knight who'd just been fitted for armor before a battle he wasn't sure he could win. When he got home, Emma was at the kitchen table doing homework under the watchful eye of Mrs. Chun from next door, who watched her for a few hours after school until Marcus got home. Mrs. Chun was ancient and wonderful, a Chinese grandmother who treated Emma like her own and refused to accept more than token payment for her time. "Miss her Webb," Mrs. Chun said, gathering her things. Emma did her homework. She ate her snack. She is a good girl. "You are lucky." "I know," Marcus said, handing her the $20 bill she would protest but eventually accept. "Thank you, Mrs. Chun." After she left, Emma looked up at him with curious eyes. "What's in the bag?" Marcus held up the garment bag with a flourish. "Your old man bought a new suit." Emma's eyes went wide. "Can I see it?" They went into the bedroom together, and Marcus unzipped the bag, revealing the charcoal gray suit. Emma reached out to touch the fabric, her small fingers gentle on the expensive wool. "Dad," she breathed, "you look like a prince in this, like a real prince from a fairy tale." He laughed, the sound surprising him with its lightness. "I don't know about that, sweetheart, but I'll look presentable at least." "You'll look amazing," she insisted, with the fierce certainty of a 10-year-old who believed her father could do anything. "Everyone's going to see how great you are." Marcus pulled her into a hug, holding her tight against the fear that was building in his chest as the reunion closer. "I hope you're right, baby girl. I really hope you're right." The days passed in a blur of work and preparation, and a growing sense of dread that Marcus couldn't quite shake. He found himself thinking about the reunion at odd moments while he was underneath the car, or making dinner, or reading Emma a bedtime story. He thought about Brandon Westbrook, who had tormented him with such casual ease, and wondered what 20 years had done to him. Had he grown up? Had he forgotten the cruelty of his youth? Or was he still the same entitled bully, just older and probably wealthier? Marcus tried to look up some of his old classmates on social media, but he barely used those platforms. His own profile was sparse, just a few photos of Emma and nothing that revealed much about his life. When he searched for Brandon Westbrook, he found a profile that was clearly professionally managed. Photos of Brandon in expensive suits at charity galas, Brandon on a yacht, Brandon shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. The captions were full of buzzwords about disruption and innovation and giving back to the community. Brandon had become exactly what Marcus had always expected, a successful businessman who wore his wealth like a shield and his charm like a weapon. The other classmates he found were similar. They had careers at law firms and tech companies. They had spouses who looked like models and children who attended exclusive private schools. They took vacations to places Marcus had only seen in magazines. Their lives were curated and perfect, a greatest hits compilation with all the messy, difficult parts edited out. Marcus closed his laptop, feeling worse than when he'd opened it. What was he thinking? He didn't belong in that world. He never had. The suit and the shoes were just a costume, a disguise that would fool no one. They would see right through him to the struggling mechanic under underneath, the single dad who was barely keeping his head above water. But then Emma would look at him with those eyes full of faith, and he would remember why he was doing this. Not for them, for her. To show her that you don't run from the hard thing, you face them. You show up even when you're terrified. You prove that you're more than what other people think you are. The night before the reunion, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on the pull-out couch staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city outside his window. Cars passing, a distant siren, the low hum of his neighbor's television through the thin walls. He thought about Sarah, about how she would have handled this. She'd always been braver than him, more confident. She would have told him to hold his head high and remember that he had nothing to be ashamed of. He must have finally dozed off sometime before dawn because he woke to the smell of burning toast and Emma's voice, calling frantically from the kitchen. Dad, I'm sorry. I was trying to make you breakfast and I burned it. Marcus stumbled off the couch, his back aching from the thin mattress, and found Emma standing at the counter looking miserable, smoke curling from the toaster. He quickly unplugged it and opened the window, waving away the smoke with a dish towel. It's okay, sweetheart. It's the thought that counts. I wanted to make today special, Emma said, her eyes filling with tears. It's your big day and I ruined it. Marcus knelt down in front of her, taking her small hands in his larger rough. You didn't ruin anything. You know what makes today special? That you tried to do something nice for me. That's what matters. He pulled her into a hug, feeling her thin arms wrap around his neck. You're the best thing in my life, Emma. Don't you ever forget that. They ended up eating cereal together at the kitchen table, the burned toast forgotten. Emma kept giving him encouraging looks, as if she was sending him strength through sheer force of will. You're going to have so much fun tonight, she said, and you're going to look so handsome that everyone's going to be jealous. Marcus hoped she was right, but the knot of anxiety in his stomach suggested otherwise. After breakfast, he cleaned the apartment with a nervous energy he couldn't contain. He scrubbed the bathroom, vacuumed the living room, organized the kitchen cabinets. Emma watched him with amusement, finally saying, Dad, you're cleaning things that are already clean. You're nervous, aren't you? He stopped mid-wipe of the already spotless counter and looked at his daughter. Yeah, he admitted, I'm really nervous. Emma came over and took the rag from his hand. It's okay to be nervous. Mom used to say that being nervous means you care about something, that it matters to you. She looked up at him with those wise old eyes. This matters to you, doesn't it? Marcus felt his throat tight. It shouldn't. These people, they were cruel to me in high school. They made me feel like I was less than them because I didn't have money. But yeah, I guess some part of me still wants to prove them wrong. Then you will, Emma said with absolute certainty. Because you're the best dad in the world, and anyone who can't see that is an idiot. He laughed, the sound breaking through his anxiety like sunlight through clouds. When did you get so smart? I learned from the best, she said, grinning. Mrs. Chun arrived at 5 o'clock to stay with Emma for the evening. Marcus had already showered and shaved, his hair cut fresh that morning by Tony at the barbershop down the street. Now came the moment of truth. He went into the bedroom and carefully removed the suit from its garment bag. The charcoal gray fabric was smooth and perfect, unmarred by wear or worry. He put it on piece by piece. The crisp white shirt, the subtle gray tie, the jacket that fit his shoulders like it had been waiting for him. When he looked in the mirror, he saw a stranger, a man who looked successful and confident and like he belonged anywhere he wanted to be. Emma knocked on the door and peeked in. Her gasp was audible. Dad, she whispered. He looked like a movie star. Marcus turned, adjusting his tie nervously. You think so? I feel like I'm playing dress up. You look perfect. She ran to him and threw her arms around his waist, careful not to wrinkle the suit. I'm so proud of you. Mrs. Chun appeared behind her, nodding approvingly. Very handsome, Mr. Webb. You will make all the ladies' hearts flutter. She chuckled, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Marcus felt his face heat. I'm not going to meet ladies, Mrs. Chun. This is just a reunion, facing some old demons, that's all. Demons wear many faces, Mrs. Chun said cryptically. Sometimes the demon is just our own fear. You go, you face your fear. You come home to this beautiful girl and you will feel free. Marcus kissed Emma goodbye, holding her perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Be good for Mars, Chun. I'll be home before you know it. I love you, Dad, Emma said. Remember, you're brave. You're strong, and you're the best. I love you too, baby girl. More than anything. The reunion was being held at the Grandview Hotel, a 5-star establishment on the waterfront that screamed wealth and exclusivity. Marcus's old sedan looked painfully out of place in the parking lot filled with BMWs, Mercedes, and Teslas. He sat in his car for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to summon the courage to walk through those doors. His reflection in the rearview mirror showed a man in an expensive suit, but underneath he felt like that scared 16-year-old scholarship kid all over again. He thought about Emma's face, her absolute faith in him. He thought about Sarah, about how disappointed she would be if he came all this way only to sit in the parking lot like a coward. He thought about Joe's words, "Don't let those bastards make you forget who you are." With a deep breath that felt like it came from his toes, Marcus opened the car door and stepped out into the cool evening air. The walk to the hotel entrance felt like a mile. Other people were arriving, couples in designer clothes, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Marcus recognized some faces, older and softer, but still familiar. No one seemed to recognize him. He was invisible, just as he'd always been. He approached the entrance, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The lobby was magnificent, all marble and crystal and soft golden light. A sign directed reunion attendees to the Skyline Ballroom on the 3rd floor. Marcus followed the signs, his new shoes clicking on the marble floor. In the elevator, he stood next to a couple who were discussing their recent trip to the Maldives. The woman's jewelry probably cost more than Marcus made in a year. They didn't even glance at him. The ballroom doors were open and music and voices spilled out into the hallway. Marcus paused at the threshold, looking in at the sea of people who had once made his life miserable. They were older, certainly, but they still had that air of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. The men had the well-fed look of success. The women were polished and elegant. They all looked like they belonged. Marcus took a step forward, then another. He was inside. He'd done it. He picked up a name tag from the registration table, peeling off the backing and sticking it to his jacket. Marcus Webb, class of 2005. The volunteer at the table, someone he didn't recognize, smiled at him warmly. "Welcome back. Enjoy yourself." He moved into the crowd feeling like he was underwater, everything slightly muffled and surreal. He grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, not because he particularly wanted it, but because it gave him something to hold, something to do with his hands. He scanned the room looking for familiar faces. There was Jessica Martinez, the girl who'd turned him down for prom. She was talking animatedly to a group of women, her hands gesturing wildly as she told some story. She looked happy, successful. She probably didn't even remember that night, didn't remember the hurt in his eyes when she'd chosen Brandon's Mercedes over him. And then he saw Brandon Westbrook himself, standing near the bar surrounded by a small crowd of admirers. He looked exactly as Marcus had expected. Older but still handsome in that effortless way of people who'd never had to work for anything. His suit probably cost more than Marcus's car. His watch definitely did. He was holding court, telling some story that had everyone laughing, and Marcus felt the old familiar anger rising in his chest. Brandon's eyes swept the room and landed on Marcus. For a moment there was no recognition, just the bland assessment of a stranger. Then something clicked. Marcus saw it happen, saw the moment Brandon placed him, the surprise, the amusement, the predatory gleam that said he'd found new entertainment for the evening. Brandon excused himself from his group and started walking toward Marcus. Every instinct Marcus had screamed at him to run, to get out before the humiliation could begin, but he stood his ground, his hand tightening on the champagne glass. He was 40 years old. He was a father. He was not that scared kid anymore. "Well, well, well," Brandon said as he approached, a smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Marcus Webb. Scholarship Webb himself. I didn't think you'd actually show up." His voice was loud enough that several people nearby turned to look. Marcus forced himself to smile to keep his voice level. "Brandon, it's been a long time." 20 years, Brandon agreed. He looked Marcus up and down, taking in the suit with an appraising eye that felt invasive. "Nice suit, not bad. You borrow that from someone?" The insult was delivered with a laugh, as if it was just a joke between old friends, but Marcus heard the edge underneath. 20 years and nothing had changed. Brandon was still the same bully, just older and more polished. "I bought it myself," Marcus replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. His father's words from years ago echoed in his mind, something about never letting bullies see you bleed. "It's amazing what you can afford when you work for a living." Brandon laughed, but it was a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, that's right. You always were good at the whole working-class hero thing. So what is it you do now? Let me guess. Still waiting tables? Or did you move up to managing a fast food place?" The people nearby were listening now, a small audience gathering like sharks drawn to blood in the water. Marcus felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of their judgment and curiosity. He could have lied. He could have made up some impressive job title, some story that would save face. But something in him rebelled against the idea. He'd spent 20 years being honest, being true to himself even when it was hard. He wasn't going to start lying now. "I'm a mechanic," he said, meeting Brandon's eyes steadily. "I work at Joe's Auto Repair on 5th Street. It's good, honest work." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Brandon laughed again, louder this time, and several people in the crowd joined in. "A mechanic. Oh, that's perfect. That's just perfect." He turned to the others as if Marcus wasn't even there. "Remember how I used to call him Scholarship Webb? Looks like I should have called him Grease Monkey instead." The laughter spread and Marcus felt something inside him start to crack. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. This was why he hadn't wanted to come. 20 years of hard work, of raising a daughter alone, of surviving grief that should have destroyed him, and all they saw was the poor kid who'd never amounted to anything. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. Marcus recognized her as Tiffany Chun, one of Brandon's old crowd. She'd been there the day he'd dumped the cafeteria tray on Marcus's head, laughing along with everyone else. Now she looked at him with something that might have been pity, which was somehow worse than mockery. "Marcus. Hi, it's been so long." She glanced at Brandon, then back at Marcus. "So, a mechanic. That's nice. Very blue collar, very salt of the earth." Condescension in her voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus wanted to tell her about the satisfaction of fixing something broken, of taking an engine that won't start and making it purr. He wanted to tell her about the customers who came back year after year because they trusted him, about Joe's faith in him, about the dignity of working with your hands. But he knew it wouldn't matter. To these people, manual labor was something you hired others to do, not something you did yourself. Brandon clapped him on the shoulder with false bonhomie. "Well, good for you, Marcus, really. Someone's got to fix our cars, right?" His hand was heavy on Marcus's shoulder, proprietary and mock. "So, are you married? Kids?" Or is it just you and your grease guns? Marcus thought about Emma, about her bright eyes and fierce love. He thought about how she was the best part of him, the only thing he'd ever done that was truly worth being proud of. I have a daughter, he said quietly. Emma, she's 10, she's everything to me. A daughter, Brandon repeated. He exchanged a look with Tiffany that Marcus couldn't quite read. And the mother? My wife died 3 years ago, Marcus said. The words still painful even after all this time. Cancer. For a moment, something that might have been genuine sympathy crossed Brandon's face, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same predatory gleam. Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that, really. I am. So you're raising her alone on a mechanic's salary? That must be tough. We manage, Marcus said shortly. He could feel the conversation spiraling, could sense Brandon setting up for some new humiliation. He looked around for an escape route, but the crowd had formed a loose circle around them, everyone watching the show. I'm sure you do, Brandon said. He gestured expansively. You know, it's funny. Life takes us all in such different directions. Some of us end up running multinational corporations. Some of us end up, well, fixing cars. But hey, someone's got to do it, right? He turned to the crowd. I was just telling everyone earlier about my new venture capital fund. We just closed a deal worth $200 million. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Someone clapped. Brandon beamed, soaking up the admiration like sunlight. Marcus felt invisible again, a shadow in the corner while Brandon shone. This was his life. This had always been his life. The star and the nobody. The winner and the loser. Another man joined the circle. Someone Marcus vaguely remembered as Kyle something. One of Brandon's old friends. Dude, Kyle said, addressing Brandon but looking at Marcus with barely concealed contempt. Remember that time we took Scholarship Webb's backpack and threw it in the pool? The way he nearly cried trying to dry out all his precious textbooks? Brandon laughed, the sound echoing through the ballroom. Oh man, I forgot about that. That was hilarious. Those books were like his most valuable possessions. The laughter from the crowd was loud now, genuine. They were remembering. They were reliving their youth, and Marcus was once again the punchline. His hands were shaking. He set down his champagne glass carefully on a nearby table because he was afraid he might shatter it with the force of his grip. Every muscle in his body was tensed, ready for flight. This had been a mistake, a terrible, humiliating mistake. You know what I remember most about high school? Brandon continued, his voice carrying across the room. He was performing now, feeding off the crowd's energy. I remember how desperate you were to fit in, how you'd show up to parties you weren't invited to, wearing clothes that were clearly from thrift stores, trying so hard to pretend you belonged. It was kind of sad, really. Marcus felt something break inside him. Not the clean break of sudden tragedy, but the slow, splintering crack of accumulated pain finally reaching its limit. He looked at Brandon, at this man who had tormented him for sport, who had never faced a single consequence for his cruelty, and he felt a rage so pure it was almost cleansing. Is that what you remember? Marcus asked, his voice low but cutting through the laughter like a blade. That's what stands out to you from 4 years of high school? The kid who wore thrift store clothes? Brandon's smile faltered slightly. Hey man, we're just reminiscing. Don't get all sensitive. No, Marcus said, taking a step forward. His fear was gone, burned away by anger and something else, something that felt like self-respect finally asserting itself after 20 years of being buried. Let me tell you what I remember, Brandon. I remember that you were a bully who got off on making other people feel small because you had nothing else going for you except your daddy's money. I remember that you were so insecure about your own worth that you had to constantly tear down anyone who might be smarter or kinder or more genuine than you. The crowd had gone quiet. Brandon's face was flushing red. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost some of its confident edge. I remember, Marcus continued, that you cheated on every test by copying off the smart kids, that you got into college because your father made a generous donation, not because you earned it, that you treated everyone around you like they existed solely for your entertainment. And you know what? 20 years later, you're still the same pathetic bully you were in high school. You've just got a more expensive suit. Brandon's face had gone from red to purple. How dare you, he sputtered. You come in here dressed in your cheap suit, pretending to be something you're not, and you have the audacity to lecture me. Cheap suit? Marcus felt a laugh bubble up in his throat, but it was bitter and sharp. Yeah, it's cheap compared to yours, I'm sure. I bought it with money I earned, every dollar of it. Money I made by actually working, not by inheriting a trust fund. And you know what that makes me? It makes me more of a man than you'll ever be. The room was completely silent now. People were staring, some with shock, some with barely concealed glee at the spectacle. Tiffany had taken a step back, her hand over her mouth. Kyle looked uncomfortable, as if he wanted to be anywhere else. Brandon seemed to be struggling to regain his composure to find the cutting remark that would put Marcus back in his place. But before he could speak, a commotion near the ballroom entrance drew everyone's attention. Someone was making their way through the crowd, and people were stepping aside, whispering and pointing. Marcus turned to look, his heart still pounding from the confrontation. A man was walking toward them, dressed in an impeccable navy suit. He was tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the bearing of someone used to commanding respect. Marcus didn't recognize him at first, but then the man smiled, and Marcus felt his entire world tilt on its axis. Mr. Webb, the man said, extending his hand. It's been far too long. I wasn't sure you'd remember me. Marcus stared at the outstretched hand, his mind racing. The face was familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. The man seemed to sense his confusion and smiled more broadly. Richard Caldwell, he said. Though I suppose the last time you saw me I was just rich. The guy whose transmission you saved when I broke down on the highway about 6 months ago. The memory clicked into place. Marcus had been driving home from work when he'd seen a luxury sedan pulled over on the shoulder, hood up, steam pouring from the engine. Most people would have driven past, but Marcus couldn't ignore a car in distress. He'd pulled over and found a well-dressed man looking helplessly at the engine. Marcus had diagnosed the problem in minutes, rigged a temporary fix with the tools he kept in his trunk, and had the man back on the road within an hour. The man had tried to pay him, but Marcus had refused. "Just pay it forward," he'd said. Now that man stood before him in the middle of the Grand View Hotel ballroom, and Marcus noticed for the first time the whispers rippling through the crowd. People were recognizing Richard Caldwell. Their faces showed shock and something like awe. "Mr. Caldwell," Marcus said, shaking his hand. "Of course I remember. How's the car running?" "Perfectly, thanks to you." Richard's grip was firm, his smile genuine. "I've been meaning to come by the garage to thank you properly, but business kept me away. And then I saw you were attending this reunion." He gestured around the ballroom. "I'm on the board of Riverside Prep, you see. I like to drop by these events when I can, see how our alumni are doing." Brandon had gone very quiet. His face had lost some of its color, and he was staring at Richard Caldwell with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Was it recognition? Fear? Richard turned to the crowd gathered around them, his expression pleasant but his eyes sharp. "I couldn't help but overhear some of your conversation as I approached. Something about cheap suits and grease monkeys?" His tone was light, but there was steel underneath it. "We were just catching up," Brandon said quickly, his voice strangled. "You know how it is at reunions. Old jokes, old memories." Richard's eyes fixed on Brandon, and the temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees. "Brandon Westbrook. Yes, I know your father. Harold Westbrook of Westbrook Capital." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. "I believe we competed for the same hedge fund acquisition last quarter. My firm won, if I recall correctly." Harold wasn't pleased. The crowd was hanging on every word now. Someone whispered to their companion, explaining who Richard Caldwell was, and the whispers spread like wildfire. He was the CEO of Caldwell Industries, one of the largest private equity firms in the country. His name appeared regularly in financial magazines. He was worth, some said, close to $3 billion. Brandon's face had gone from pale to ashen. "Mr. Caldwell, I didn't mean any disrespect. We were just having some fun." "Fun," Richard repeated, the word hanging between them like an accusation. He turned back to Marcus. "This man," he said, gesturing to Marcus, "saved me from what could have been a very expensive and time-consuming problem. Not only that, but when I tried to compensate him for his time and expertise, he refused payment. He told me to pay it forward." His eyes swept the crowd. "In my experience, you can learn everything you need to know about a person's character in moments like that. Actions reveal who we really are." Marcus felt his face heating up. "Miss Caldwell, you don't have to do this." "Oh, but I do," Richard said firmly. "You see, I've spent my career evaluating people, determining who has genuine worth and who is simply riding on family connections or inherited wealth." He looked pointedly at Brandon. "It's a skill you develop when you start from nothing and build something meaningful." There was a collective intake of breath. Richard Caldwell had started from nothing. That information seemed to be news to many in the crowd, though others were nodding as if they'd always known. "I grew up in poverty," Richard continued, his voice carrying easily across the now silent ballroom. "My father was a janitor. My mother cleaned houses. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through community college, then state school. I built my first business from a one-room office with a phone and a dream." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "So when I hear people mocking honest work, when I hear them using someone's profession as an insult, it tells me everything I need to know about their character, or rather, their lack of it." Brandon looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. The people around him were edging away, suddenly eager to distance themselves from him. Tiffany had disappeared entirely into the crowd. "Mr. Webb here," Richard said, turning back to Marcus with a warm smile, "represents something I deeply respect. He's a craftsman, a professional who takes pride in his work. He's raising a daughter on his own, which is one of the hardest jobs in the world. And from what I could see in our brief interaction 6 months ago, he's teaching her the same values of hard work and integrity that clearly guide his own life." Marcus didn't know what to say. He'd come to this reunion expecting to be humiliated, to have every insecurity confirmed. Instead, he was being defended by one of the most powerful men in the country. It felt surreal, like he'd stepped into someone else's story. Richard wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and then showed it to Marcus. "I'd like you to look at something." On the screen was a photo of a young man in greasy coveralls standing next to an old car, grinning with pride. "That's me," Richard said. 25 years old, running my first auto repair shop. It was before I moved into finance, but I've never forgotten those days. Never forgotten the satisfaction of fixing something with my own hands, of helping someone get back on the road. He pocketed his phone and addressed the crowd again. "Oh, the point I'm making is simple. There is no such thing as a job that's beneath anyone. There is only honest work and dishonest work, hard work and lazy work. Mr. Webb does honest, hard work. He helps people. He contributes to his community. He's raising the next generation with values that seem to be lacking in some of our so-called elite. The dig at Brandon was unmistakable, and several people in the crowd weren't even trying to hide their smiles now. Brandon had been effectively neutered, his power to humiliate stripped away by someone with actual authority. Now, Richard said, turning to Marcus with a conspiratorial smile, I actually came here tonight with an ulterior motive. I've been looking for a fleet manager for Caldwell Industries. We have over 200 vehicles across our various offices. Everything from standard sedans to specialized equipment trucks. I need someone who understands mechanics, someone with integrity, someone who can build and lead a team. The position comes with a substantial salary, full benefits, and a company car. He paused. I was going to post the job next week, but I think I may have just found the perfect candidate. Marcus felt like he'd been hit by lightning. Was this really happening? A company car? Full benefits? A management position at one of the most successful firms in the country? It seemed impossible, like a dream he might wake up from at any moment. Mark Caldwell, I don't know what to say. I've never managed a fleet before. But you understand vehicles, Richard said. You understand people based on how you helped me without a second thought. And more importantly, you have the character I look for in my employees. The rest can be learned. He held out a business card. Think about it. Call me Monday. We'll set up a proper interview, discuss the details. But I'll tell you right now, the job is yours if you want it. Marcus took the card, his fingers trembling slightly. The weight of it felt enormous, like he was holding his entire future in the palm of his hand. Thank you, he managed. I don't know how to thank you. Richard smiled. Thank me by being the kind of man I think you are. That's all the thanks I need. He glanced at Brandon, who was trying to make himself as small as possible. And perhaps by teaching your daughter that true success isn't measured by the size of your trust fund, but by the size of your character. With that, Richard Caldwell nodded to the crowd, shook Marcus's hand one more time, and walked away to mingle with other guests. The moment he left, people swarmed Marcus. Suddenly everyone wanted to talk to him, to shake his hand, to be associated with the man Richard Caldwell had singled out for praise. The same people who'd been laughing at him minutes ago were now congratulating him, telling him they'd always known he'd do well, claiming they remembered how hard he'd worked in high school. Marcus felt like he was watching himself from outside his body. The faces around him were animated, friendly, welcoming. These were the same people who'd ignored him in high school, who'd walked past him in the hallways as if he didn't exist. Now they were treating him like he mattered, but he knew why. It wasn't because they'd suddenly seen his worth. It was because Richard Caldwell had assigned him value. They were like stock traders, adjusting their positions based on market signal. Jessica Martinez appeared at his elbow, her perfume expensive and overwhelming. Marcus, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. Richard Caldwell himself. She touched his arm, her fingers lingering. We should catch up. Do you remember prom? I always regretted not going with you. The lie was so blatant, so shameless that Marcus almost laughed. He remembered prom perfectly. He remembered her walking away without a backward glance, her arm linked with Brandon's as they climbed into that Mercedes. He remembered standing alone in a borrowed tuxedo, watching his dreams evaporate. Now she was rewriting history, pretending she'd cared all along. That's kind of you to say, Marcus replied, his tone polite but distant. He gently extracted his arm from her grip. But I think we both remember how that night actually went. Jessica's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. Well, water under the bridge, right? We were kids. She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Listen, I'm actually between things right now. Job-wise, I mean. If you end up taking that position at Caldwell Industries, maybe you could put in a good word for me? There it was, the real reason for her sudden interest. Marcus felt a wave of disappointment that surprised him with its intensity. Some part of him, some foolish, hopeful part, had wanted to believe that people could change, that 20 years might have brought wisdom and growth. But Jessica was still the same person who'd measured people by what they could do for her. I'll keep that in mind, he said noncommittally, already looking for an escape route. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal blur. Marcus moved through the crowd like a ghost, accepting congratulations that felt hollow, making small talk with people who suddenly found him fascinating. He saw Brandon occasionally, always on the periphery now, his earlier confidence completely shattered. At one point their eyes met across the room and Marcus saw something in Brandon's face that might have been hatred or envy or maybe just the dawning realization that the world didn't always bend to his will. Kyle approached him near the end of the night, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He offered one to Marcus, his expression sheepish. Look man, I just wanted to say I'm sorry about earlier. The stuff about the backpack and the jokes, that was a long time ago, and it wasn't cool. Marcus took the glass but didn't drink. He studied Kyle's face, trying to determine if the apology was genuine or just another calculation, another attempt to align himself with the winning side. It's fine, he said finally. We were kids. Like Jessica said, water under the bridge. Kyle nodded, relief washing over his features. You seem like you've done really well for yourself. A daughter, a good job. That thing with Caldwell, man, that was incredible. Marcus took a small sip of the whiskey, feeling the burn slide down his throat. I've done okay, he said. His thoughts went to Emma, probably asleep by now, curled up in her bed with her favorite stuffed elephant. I've got what matters. That's a good attitude, Kyle said. though Marcus could tell he didn't really understand. To people like Kyle, what mattered was status and wealth and the approval of others. The idea that happiness could be found in a small apartment with a daughter who loved you was foreign to him. After Kyle wandered off, Marcus found himself standing alone near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. The lights spread out before him like scattered stars, each one representing lives and dreams and struggles he would never know. He thought about how close he'd come to not coming tonight, how Emma's faith had pushed him through the door. She'd been right. He'd faced his fear. He'd stood up to Brandon. And somehow, impossibly, the evening had turned into something that might change his life. He pulled out his phone and saw a text from Mrs. Chun, sent an hour ago. Emma is sleeping. She made me promise to tell you she is proud of you. Also, she left you a note on the kitchen table. Sweet girl. Marcus felt his eyes sting with unexpected tears. His daughter, his beautiful, wise daughter, had known he needed encouragement even after he left. He typed back a quick thank you to Mrs. Chun and pocketed his phone, suddenly desperate to be home to check on Emma, to ground himself in what was real and solid and true. He was heading toward the exit when a hand caught his elbow. He turned to find an older woman, someone he didn't recognize, looking at him with kind eyes. "Excuse me," she said. "I don't think we know each other. I graduated in 1998. But I couldn't help overhearing what happened tonight, and I just wanted to tell you that what you said to Brandon Westbrook was exactly what someone should have said years ago. That boy was a terror, and he's grown into exactly the kind of man you'd expect." Marcus didn't know what to say. "Thank you," he managed. "I teach at Riverside now," the woman used. "English literature. And I make it a point to remind my students that character matters more than pedigree, that kindness matters more than connections." She smiled. "You're proof of that. I hope you know how rare that is." After she walked away, Marcus stood for a moment, letting her words sink in. Character matters more than pedigree. Kindness matters more than connections. He'd lived those principles not because he was trying to be noble, but because they were the only tools he had. When you didn't have money or power, all you had was your integrity. He'd clung to that through 20 years of struggle, and tonight, impossibly, it had been enough. The drive home was quiet, the streets less crowded now that it was past midnight. Marcus's old sedan made its familiar rattling sounds, a symphony he knew by heart. He passed through neighborhoods that shifted from wealthy to working class, each transition marked by the changing architecture, the different cars parked on the streets. He knew which world he belonged to, and Richard Caldwell's job offer hadn't changed that. Not yet, maybe not ever. When he pulled up to his apartment building, he sat in the car for a moment, the engine ticking as he looked up at his window on the third floor, saw the soft glow of the nightlight he always left on for Emma. This was his life, this small apartment, this old car, this neighborhood where people worked hard and struggled and survived. He'd spent so many years feeling ashamed of it, seeing it through the eyes of people like Brandon Westbrook who would consider it a failure. But tonight something had shifted. Maybe it had started when Richard Caldwell defended him. Or maybe earlier when he'd finally stood up to Brandon. Quote, or maybe, he thought, it had started the moment Emma had told him to face his fears. He climbed the stairs to his apartment, his footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. The hallway smelled like someone's late dinner, spices and cooking oil. He could hear a television playing through someone's door. The murmur of voices. These were the sounds of home, familiar and real. He unlocked his door as quietly as possible and stepped inside. Mrs. Chun had left a lamp on in the living room. Everything was tidy, Emma's homework stacked neatly on the table, her shoes lined up by the door. Marcus set his keys down and saw the note Emma had left for him, written in her careful 10-year-old handwriting on a piece of notebook paper. "Dear Dad," the note read, "I know you were nervous about tonight, but I want you to know that you're my hero no matter what happens. You're the bravest, kindest, best dad in the whole world. Those people at your reunion are lucky they got to see you. Love, Emma, P.S. Mrs. Chun let me stay up an extra hour. Don't be mad at her," I asked really nicely. Marcus read the note 3 times, his vision blurring with tears he didn't try to hold back. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his wallet, next to the photo of Sarah he always carried. Then he walked to Emma's bedroom and opened the door just enough to look inside. She was sleeping on her side, one arm wrapped around her stuffed elephant, her hair spread across the pillow like a dark halo. In the dim light from the hallway, she looked impossibly young and vulnerable. Marcus stood there for a long moment, just watching her breathe, feeling the weight of responsibility and love that had defined his life for the past 10 years. Everything he did, every choice he made was for her. The reunion, the job offer, the confrontation with Brandon, all of it paled in comparison to this. His daughter, safe and sleeping, dreaming whatever dreams 10-year-olds dream. He closed the door softly and went to change out of his suit, hanging it carefully in the closet. The man in the expensive clothes felt like a costume he was removing, revealing the real Marcus underneath. He pulled on sweatpants and an old t-shirt, familiar and comfortable, and then pulled out the couch bed. But sleep wouldn't come. His mind was racing, replaying the events of the evening over and over. The humiliation, the confrontation, Richard Caldwell's unexpected intervention, the job offer that seemed too good to be true. He pulled out the business card Richard had given him, studying it in the lamplight. Simple, elegant, expensive cardstock. Richard Caldwell, CEO, Caldwell, and a phone number and an email address. Nothing flashy, nothing pretentious, just information, straightforward and honest. Marcus thought about the man himself, about his story of starting from poverty and building an empire. It gave him hope. but it also terrified him. What if he wasn't up to the challenge? What if he took the job and failed? What if he proved Brandon right after all? But then he thought about Emma's note. "You're my hero no matter what happens." She believed in him with a faith that was absolute and unshakable. He couldn't let his fear rob her of the opportunities this job could provide. Better schools, a bigger apartment, maybe even a house with a yard where she could play, college without the burden of crushing debt, a future that wasn't defined by struggle and sacrifice. He fell asleep sometime before dawn, the business card still clutched in his hand. Emma woke him at 7:30 by jumping on the couch bed with all the enthusiasm of a child who'd been waiting impatiently for her father to wake up. "Dad, Dad, Dad," she chanted, bouncing with each repetition. "Tell me everything. How was it? What happened? Did you see the bullies? Did you show them how awesome you are?" Marcus groaned, his back protesting the inadequate mattress in the late night. He pulled Emma down next to him, wrapping her in a hug. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart." She squirmed in his arms, her energy boundless. "Don't avoid the question. What happened?" So Marcus told her. He edited the story, leaving out the worst of Brandon's cruelty. But he told her about standing up for himself, about Richard Caldwell's defense, about the job offer. Emma listened with wide eyes, her expression growing more excited with each detail. "A company car?" she breathed. "That's amazing. Does that mean we get to keep our car for me when I'm old enough to drive?" He laughed, ruffling her hair. "You're 10, baby. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Besides, I haven't accepted the job yet. I have to call Mr. Caldwell on Monday and actually interview. But you're going to take it, right?" Emma's voice was suddenly serious, her eyes searching his face. "Please tell me you're going to take it." Marcus hesitated. "Honey, it's a big decision. It's a different kind of work than I'm used to. Managing people, dealing with corporate stuff. I'm not sure I'm qualified." Emma sat up straight, her expression fierce. "Dad, you're qualified for anything. You're the smartest person I know. You can fix anything. You help people all the time." Mr. Caldwell saw that. "He knows you're special." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom would want you to take it." The mention of Sarah hit him like a physical blow. Emma rarely brought up her mother directly, and when she did, it was always meaningful. He looked at his daughter, this wise, beautiful soul who somehow understood things that should be beyond her years. "You think so?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Mom always said you could do anything if you yourself. She told me that before she got too sick to talk much. She made me promise to remind you if you ever forgot." Marcus felt tears pricking his eyes for the second time in less than 12 hours. He pulled Emma close, holding her as if she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "Okay," he whispered into her hair. "Okay, I'll take it. I'll call him Monday and I'll take the job." Emma pulled back, her face radiant with joy. "Really? Really? For you, for us, for the future Mom wanted us to have." They spent the rest of Saturday like they always did when Marcus wasn't working. They went to the library where Emma loaded up on books while Marcus browsed the job search section, looking at titles about management and leadership, trying to prepare himself for this new world he was about to enter. They had lunch at their favorite diner, the one where the waitress knew their order by heart. They walked through the park, feeding the ducks the ends of Emma's sandwich. It was a perfect day, ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Marcus found himself seeing everything through a double lens. This life they had now and the life they might have soon. Would they still come to this park when they could afford better entertainment? Would they still eat at this diner when they could go to fancier restaurants? He hoped so. He hoped the new opportunities wouldn't erase the simple joys that had sustained them through the hard years. Sunday morning, Marcus woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He made pancakes for Emma, her favorite. And while they ate, he told her his plan. "Tomorrow I'm going to call Miss Caldwell and set up the interview. But I'm also going to go into the garage and talk to Joe. He deserves to know before anyone else. He's been good to me, Emma. He gave me a job when I needed one, and he's been more than a boss. He's been a friend." Emma nodded seriously. "You should bring him something, like a thank you present." "That's a good idea, sweetheart. What do you think he'd like?" Emma considered this carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "He likes coffee, right? And those cigars he smokes on Fridays?" Marcus smiled. "Good memory. Yeah. He does. We'll stop by that tobacco shop on the way to the garage tomorrow. Can I come with you?" Emma asked. "I want to say goodbye to Joe too, and to see your face when you tell him." The request surprised Marcus, but it also felt right. Joe had met Emma dozens of times, usually when school was out and she'd spend afternoons at the garage doing homework in the small office while Marcus worked. Joe treated her like a granddaughter, always sneaking her candy from the vending machine and asking about her schoolwork. "Of course you can come. I think Joe would like that." Monday morning arrived with a gray drizzle that matched Marcus's nervous energy. He dressed carefully, not in his new suit but in clean jeans and a button-down shirt, something that felt more honest. Emma wore her favorite dress, the blue one with white flowers that Sarah had bought her before she got sick. They stopped at the tobacco shop and Marcus bought Joe's favorite cigars, expensive ones he rarely splurged on. Then they drove to the garage. Joe was under a truck when they arrived, just his legs visible, the sound of wrenching echoing in the bay. "Marcus," he called out, having recognized the sound of Marcus's car. "You're early. Don't tell me you're so eager to get back to work that you couldn't wait until your actual shift." Marcus cleared his throat. "Actually, Joe, I need to talk to you about something. It's important." The wrenching stopped. Joe rolled out from under the truck, his face smeared with grease, his expression curious. He saw Emma standing next to Marcus and his face broke into a warm smile. "And you brought Miss Emma. This must be serious." He heaved himself up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Come on back to the office." They sat in Joe's cramped office, Marcus and Emma on one side of the battered desk, Joe on the other. Marcus set the box of cigars on the desk between them. "These are for you, to say thank you." Joe's eyebrows rose. Thank you for what? You haven't quit yet. His tone was light, but his eyes were knowing. He'd already guessed. Marcus took a deep breath. The reunion Friday night, it didn't go the way I expected. He told Joe the whole story. Everything he'd held back from Emma's edited version. The cruelty, the humiliation, Richard Caldwell's intervention, the job offer. Joe listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Marcus finished, Joe leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. Well, he said finally, it's quite a story. His eyes moved to Emma. What do you think about all this, Miss Emma? I think my dad should take the job, Emma said firmly. I think Mr. Caldwell saw what we already know, that my dad is special and he can do anything. Joe smiled, a gentle, sad smile. You're right about that, Gittle. Your dad is one of the best men I know. Joe turned his attention back to Marcus. So you're leaving me. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered without rancor or resentment. I don't want to leave you in the lurch, Marcus said quickly. I can give you as much notice as you need. Help you find a replacement. Train them. Whatever you need, Joe. Joe waved a hand dismissively. Marcus, stop. This is good news. This is great news. You think I can't see how hard you work? How you're always taking the extra shifts, always saying yes when I need someone to cover? You do it for her. He nodded toward Emma. And that's admirable. But you've been running yourself ragged for years. This job, this opportunity, it's a chance for something better. You'd be a fool not to take it. But you've been so good to me, Marcus protested. When Sarah died and I was a mess, you let me bring Emma to work. You never complained when I needed time off for her school events. You paid me more than the job was. Joe's expression softened. I paid you exactly what you were worth, which was more than I could really afford, to be honest. You're the best mechanic I've ever had. But more than that, you're a good man, Marcus. And good men deserve good things. He picked up the box of cigars, examining them. These are nice. Too nice. You shouldn't have spent the money. I wanted to, Marcus said. You gave me stability when my world fell apart. That's worth more than cigars. Joe stood up and came around the desk, pulling Marcus into a rough hug that smelled like motor oil and Old Spice. You're gonna do great things, kid. I've always known it. Don't you dare feel guilty about moving up in the world. And when you're running that fancy fleet for Caldwell Industries, remember where you came from. Remember that honest work comes in all forms. Marcus hugged him back. This bear of a man who'd been more father to him than friend. I will. I promise. Emma was crying, tears streaming down her face. She threw her arms around both of them, and they stood there in the cramped office, three people who'd become a family of sorts, saying goodbye to one chapter and hello to another. After they left the garage, Marcus sat in his car for a long moment, Richard Caldwell's business card in his hand. Emma watched him expectantly. You're going to call him now, right? Marcus looked at the card, at the phone number that represented a door to a different future. Right. Out. He pulled out his phone and dialed before he could change his mind. The phone rang twice before a professional female voice answered. Caldwell Industries, Mr. Caldwell's office. How may I help you? My name is Marcus Webb, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Mr. Caldwell asked me to call today to discuss a position. There was a brief pause, the sound of typing. Yes, Mr. Webb. Mr. Caldwell has been expecting your call. Please hold for just a moment. The hold music was classical, something elegant and refined. Emma grabbed his free hand, squeezing it tight. Then the music cut off, and Richard Caldwell's warm voice filled the line. Marcus, I'm glad you called. I wasn't entirely sure you would. I'll be honest, Mr. Caldwell, I almost didn't. This is all very overwhelming. Richard chuckled. Call me Richard, please. And overwhelming is good. It means you understand the magnitude of what I'm offering. Tell me, did you think about it over the weekend? I did. I talked to my daughter and to my current employer. Marcus glanced at Emma, who was practically vibrating with excitement. And I'd like to accept the position if it's still available. It is. And I'm delighted to hear it. Richard's voice was genuinely pleased. Now there's a proper process we need to follow. HR will need you to come in for a formal interview, though I'll tell you now it's mostly a formality. I want you on my team, Marcus. I need someone I can trust. Someone who understands hard work and has genuine integrity. Those qualities can't be taught. When would you need me to start? Marcus asked. I want to give my current employer adequate notice. How's a month sound? That gives you time to wrap things up at the garage and for us to get all the paperwork sorted. The position comes with a starting salary of $95,000 annually, full medical and dental benefits. 4 weeks paid vacation, and yes, a company vehicle. A nice one. You'll be based at our headquarters downtown, managing our entire fleet across 3 states. Marcus felt lightheaded. $95,000. That was more than double what he made at the garage. That was stability. That was Emma's college fund. That was a future he'd barely dared to dream about. That's incredibly generous. It's fair compensation for the work you'll be doing, Richard corrected. My assistant will email you the details and schedule your formal interview for later this week. Welcome to Caldwell Industries, Marcus. I think this is going to be the beginning of something very good. After he hung up, Marcus sat in stunned silence. Emma broke it by screaming with joy. A sound so loud and pure that it made him laugh despite his shock. We did it, Dad. We really did it. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. No, baby. You did it. You made me face my fears. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. This is because of you. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind. Marcus worked his final shifts at the garage, training his replacement. a young guy named Tommy who reminded Marcus of himself 20 years ago, eager and hardworking and trying to build something from nothing. Joe refused to throw him a going-away party, claiming he didn't do emotional goodbyes, but on Marcus's last day, the entire garage crew was there, and there was a cake that said, "Good luck, boss," which made Marcus laugh because he'd never been anyone's boss. The formal interview at Caldwell Industries was intimidating, a glass tower downtown with views that stretched for miles, but Richard was there, and his warm presence made everything less terrifying. The HR director was professional but kind, walking Marcus through the details of his new position. Fleet manager for Caldwell Industries meant overseeing vehicle maintenance, managing a team of 15 people, coordinating with various departments across the company's holding. It was a big job, a challenging job, but Richard's faith in him was unwavering. "You'll have a learning curve," Richard told him during a private conversation in his corner office. "But I've built my success on finding talented people and putting them in positions where they can grow. You have the foundation. We'll provide the training and support. Trust yourself, Marcus." "I do." Marcus started his new job on a Monday in October, the air crisp with the promise of fall. Emma insisted on taking a picture of him in his new work clothes, business casual, standing next to their old sedan before he drove to his first day. "You look like a executive, Dad," she said, snapping photos with her phone. "Wait until I show everyone at school." The office was nothing like the garage. It was clean and bright, with windows that let in natural light and coffee that didn't taste like motor oil. His office was small, but it was his, with a door that closed and a desk that wasn't covered in grease. His team was welcoming, a mix of young professionals and experienced mechanics who understood vehicles from the ground up. They treated him with respect, not because Richard Caldwell had hired him, but because he knew his stuff and wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. That first week was exhausting in a completely different way than the garage had been. Mental exhaustion rather than physical. Learning new systems, meeting new people, understanding the scope of what he was responsible for. But it was also exhilarating. He was good at this. His years of experience, his understanding of how things worked, his ability to talk to both executives and mechanics, all of it translated into this new role in ways he hadn't expected. The company car arrived on Friday, a sleek black SUV that was newer and nicer than anything Marcus had ever owned. When he drove it home, Emma was waiting at the window and she ran down the 3 flights of stairs to see it up close. "This is ours?" she asked, running her hand along the hood. "This is ours," Marcus confirmed. He opened the door and let her climb inside, watching her face light up at the leather seats, the technology, the newness of it all. "What do you say we go for a drive?" They drove through the city as the sun set, the buildings turning gold in the dying light. Emma chattered about her day at school, about her friends, about the book she was reading. Marcus listened, one hand on the steering wheel of his new car, heading toward their old apartment in their old neighborhood. Some things were changing, but the things that mattered, those would stay the same. 6 months into his new position at Caldwell Industries, Marcus Webb barely recognized his own life. The transformation hadn't been instantaneous or magical, but gradual and earned, built on 12-hour days and a determination to prove Richard Caldwell's faith in him hadn't been misplaced. His team respected him because he never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He still got his hands dirty when a particularly tricky mechanical problem arose. Still spent time in the garage bays understanding the work from the ground up, but he also learned the corporate side, the budgets and forecasting, the vendor negotiations and staff evaluations. Emma had adjusted to their new life with the resilience of childhood. They'd moved from the cramped apartment to a modest house in a neighborhood with good schools and tree-lined streets. It wasn't a mansion, nothing ostentatious, but it had a yard where Emma could play and a real bedroom for Marcus instead of a pull-out couch. Emma's room was bigger than their entire previous living room, and she decorated it with posters and books and the kind of cheerful chaos that came from finally having space to spread out. The real change, though, was in the small moments. Marcus could now say yes when Emma asked for a new book instead of suggesting they visit the library. He could buy groceries without calculating every item. It opened a college savings account that actually had meaningful deposits each month. The constant low-grade anxiety about money, the thing that had hummed beneath every moment of his life for 20 years, had finally quieted, but success brought its own complications. Marcus found himself invited to company events, networking dinners, corporate galas. Richard insisted his fleet manager needed to understand the broader business, needed to interact with clients and partners. Marcus went, always feeling slightly out of place in his new suits, always aware he was the only person in the room who'd spent the previous decade with grease under his fingernails. But he went and he learned, and slowly the imposter syndrome began to fade. It was at one of these events, a charity gala for Riverside Prep Scholarship Fund, ironically enough, that Marcus ran into Brandon Westbrook again. The gala was held at the same Grandview Hotel where the reunion had taken place, and Marcus felt a strange sense of déjà vu as he walked through the marble lobby. This time, though, he wasn't alone. Richard Caldwell had insisted Marcus attend as his guest, and Emma had helped him pick out his tie that morning. a subtle navy blue that she claimed made him look distinguished. The ballroom was even more elegant than it had been for the reunion, decorated with thousands of twinkling lights and enormous floral arrangements that probably cost more than Marcus's old monthly rent. He recognized several faces from the reunion, people who'd witnessed his confrontation with Brandon. They greeted him warmly now, some with genuine friendliness, others with the calculating courtesy of people who recognized he'd become someone worth knowing. Marcus was standing near the silent auction tables, examining a weekend getaway package he was considering bidding on for Emma, when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Well, well, if it isn't the golden boy himself. He turned to find Brandon Westbrook holding a glass of champagne and wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Brandon looked different than he had at the reunion. Thinner, maybe, or perhaps just more worn around the edges. His suit was still expensive. His watch still cost more than a car, but something in his bearing had changed. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by something harder, more brittle. "Brandon," Marcus said evenly. "Good to see you." "Is it?" Brandon took a sip of his champagne, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "I heard you've done well for yourself. Fleet manager at Caldwell Industries. Quite the step up from Joe's garage." Marcus heard the edge in Brandon's tone but refused to engage with it. "I've been fortunate. Richard Caldwell gave me an opportunity, and I'm grateful for it." "Grateful," Brandon repeated, his smile twisting into something uglier. "That's very humble of you. Very appropriate for someone in your position." His voice dropped lower, more venomous. "You know what I think? I think you're still the same charity case you always were, just wearing a better costume now." Marcus felt the old anger stirring, but kept his voice calm. "If that's what you need to believe, Brandon, that's fine. But I'm not here to argue. I'm here to support the scholarship fund, so other kids like me can get the education they deserve." Brandon's face flushed red. "Don't you dare act superior to me. You got lucky. One chance meeting with Caldwell, and suddenly you think you're somebody. But we both know the truth. You're nobody. You were nobody in high school, and you're nobody now. Just a grease monkey who got lucky." Actually, a new voice interrupted smoothly. "He's the man who's revolutionized our fleet management system and saved Caldwell Industries approximately $2 million in operational costs over the last 6 months." Both Marcus and Brandon turned to find Richard Caldwell standing behind them, his expression pleasant but his eyes cold as he looked at Brandon. "Richard, I didn't realize you were," Marcus started, but Richard held up a hand. "I was just arriving and heard raised voices." He looked at Brandon with the kind of dismissive assessment that came from decades of evaluating worth. "Brandon Westbrook, isn't it? I believe we've met. Your father, Harold, and I have competed on several deals." He paused, his smile sharpening. "I understand you've recently left your position at Westbrook Capital. Something about creative accounting practices that didn't sit well with your investors." Brandon's face went from red to white. That's not. Those were just allegations. Allegations that cost you your position and your father a considerable amount of money in settlements." Richard continued relentlessly. "I make it my business to know these things." He turned to Marcus, his expression warming. "Marcus, there's someone I'd like you to meet, a major client who's interested in discussing how we manage our fleet." He offered his arm in a gesture that was both friendly and deliberately exclusionary of Brandon. "Shall we?" Marcus nodded, following Richard away from Brandon, who stood frozen among the silent auction tables, his champagne glass trembling in his hand. As they walked, Richard spoke quietly. "I apologize for that confrontation. I should have warned you Westbrook would be here. His father still donates to the school despite everything." "It's okay," Marcus said. He's hurting. His whole world was built on being better than everyone else, and now that foundation is cracking." "You're more generous than he deserves," Richard observed. "But that's one of the reasons I hired you. You understand people, Marcus. You see them clearly, but without cruelty. It's a rare gift." And the client Richard wanted him to meet was the CEO of a major logistics company, a woman named Patricia Morrison, who was indeed interested in how Caldwell Industries managed such an extensive fleet so efficiently. Marcus found himself explaining his system, the mix of preventive maintenance, strategic vendor relationships, and careful attention to individual vehicle needs. He talked about treating each vehicle like it had a story, understanding their quirks and requirements. Patricia listened intently, asking smart questions, and by the end of their conversation, she'd requested a formal meeting to discuss implementing similar systems in her own company. "That's a $50 million client you just charmed," Richard murmured as Patricia walked away to mingle with other guests. "And you did it by being authentically yourself. That's worth more than all the business school degrees in the world." The rest of the evening passed pleasantly. Marcus made connections, had interesting conversations, and found himself genuinely enjoying the event. He bid on and won the weekend getaway package for Emma, imagining her excitement when he told her they'd be going to a lakeside resort with kayaking and hiking trails. As the gala was winding down, Marcus stood near the entrance saying goodbye to Richard when a commotion outside caught their attention. Through the glass doors, they could see a small crowd gathering on the circular driveway, people pulling out phones to take pictures. The valet had just brought around a car, and it was causing quite a stir. It was a Rolls Royce Phantom, midnight blue with chrome accents, the kind of car that belonged in movies about impossibly wealthy people. The door opened and a figure stepped out, tall and elegant, moving with confidence toward the entrance. Richard Caldwell smiled, a knowing expression crossing his face as he checked his watch. Right on time, he turned to Marcus. I have one more surprise for you tonight. Consider it a thank you for 6 months of exceptional work and for putting up with corporate events like these. Before Marcus could ask what he meant, the figure from the Rolls Royce entered the hotel, and Marcus's breath caught in his throat. It was Emma. His 10-year-old daughter, dressed in a beautiful navy dress that matched the car, her hair done up in an elegant style he'd never seen before. Walking beside Richard's wife, Catherine, who Emma had met several times at company family events. "Dad," Emma called out, running toward him with childlike enthusiasm that contrasted beautifully with her grown-up appearance. "Mrs. Caldwell helped me get ready. It was supposed to be a surprise. Did we surprise you?" Marcus knelt down, not caring that his expensive suit was wrinkling, and pulled his daughter into a tight hug. "You definitely surprised me. What are you doing here, sweetheart? I thought Mrs. Chun was watching you tonight." "That was part of the plan," Richard said, joining them with Catherine. "We thought you deserved to have your daughter here for the announcement." He gestured toward the ballroom where people were starting to filter back in, attracted by the commotion. "What announcement?" Marcus asked, standing up but keeping Emma's hand in his. Richard's smile widened. "The scholarship fund we're supporting tonight? Caldwell Industries is making a major donation, $2 million, to create a permanent endowment for students from low-income families. Full-ride scholarships, no strings attached, for kids who have the grades and the drive but not the financial resource." He paused, his eyes warm. "And I'm naming it the Marcus Webb Scholarship Fund." Marcus felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "You're what? You can't do that." "I can and I did," Richard said firmly. "Your story, Marcus, the scholarship kid who made good through hard work and integrity, that's the story I want to tell. That's what I want this fund to represent. Not charity, but investment in potential. Catherine and I discussed it, and we can't think of a better way to honor what you've brought to our company and our lives." Emma squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with tears and pride. "See, Dad? I told you that you were special. Now everyone will know." Inside the ballroom, the announcement was made formally. Marcus stood on stage next to Richard and Catherine, Emma beside him, while the assembled guests applauded. He saw Brandon in the crowd, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, anger and envy, and something that might have been grudging respect. He saw his former classmates, the ones who'd laughed at Scholarship Webb, now applauding a scholarship fund bearing his name. The irony was not lost on it. After the announcement, after the speeches and the congratulations and the photographs, Marcus found himself alone for a moment on the hotel's terrace, looking out at the city lights. Emma was inside with Catherine, eating fancy desserts and being fussed over by the other guests. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Brandon Westbrook standing in the doorway. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Brandon moved to the railing, keeping several feet of distance between them. "That was quite a moment in there," he said finally. "A scholarship in your name. I bet that feels good." "It feels surreal," Marcus admitted. 6 months ago, I was wondering how I'd afford Emma's school supplies. Now my name is on a $2 million fund." Brandon laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. "You know what's funny? My father spent millions on Riverside Prep over millions, and not $1 of it has his name on it. It all went to general operating expenses, tax write-offs. But you show up to one reunion, get one lucky break, and suddenly you're the hero of the story." Marcus turned to look at him fully. "Is that what you think this is? Luck? One lucky break?" Brandon's jaw tightened. "What else would you call it?" "I'd call it consequence," Marcus said quietly. "Not luck. I helped a stranger on the highway because that's who I am. That's who my parents raised me to be, who my wife believed I could be, who I'm trying to teach my daughter to be. Richard Caldwell didn't give me anything I didn't earn. He gave me an opportunity, and I worked 12-hour days to prove I deserved it." Brandon was silent for a long moment, staring out at the city. Finally, he spoke, his voice so low Marcus almost didn't hear it. "I lost everything, you know. The job, the respect, most of my friends. Dad barely speaks to me. He thinks I'm an embarrassment to the family name." His voice cracked slightly. "And the worst part is I don't even know who I am without all of that. Without the money and the power and the status. I know who Brandon Westbrook is when he's nobody." Marcus felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. "You're not nobody, Brandon. You never were. That was the whole problem. You had so much handed to you that you never had to figure out who you actually were underneath it all." Brandon turned to him, his eyes red-rimmed. "How did you do it? How did you survive being nobody? Because that's what you were in high school, right? That's what I made sure everyone thought you were." "I was never nobody," Marcus said firmly. "I was someone's son, someone's student, and eventually someone's husband and someone's father. Those are the things that defined me, not the size of my bank account or the opinions of bullies." He moved closer to the railing, standing beside Brandon now instead of across from him. "You want to know the truth? High school was hell. You and your friends made my life miserable. But it also taught me something important. It taught me that my worth wasn't determined by what other people thought of me. It was determined by who I chose to be when no one was watching." Brandon wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so vulnerable and human that it stripped away years of pretense. "I'm sorry," he said, the words barely a whisper, "for everything. For high school, for the reunion, for tonight. I was cruel because I was empty, and I didn't know any other way to feel full." Marcus considered the apology, this broken man standing beside him who had once seemed so powerful and untouchable. "I accept your apology, but Brandon, you need to do the real work now. You need to figure out who you are when you strip away everything else. And you need to do it not because you lost everything, but because it's the only way you'll ever actually have anything that matters." They stood in silence for a while, two men who'd started in such different places and had somehow ended up here, on this terrace equals in their humanity if nothing else. Finally, Brandon nodded. "Thank you," he said, and then he walked back inside, his shoulders a little straighter than they'd been. Marcus stayed on the terrace a few minutes longer, letting the cool night air clear his head. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from that cramped apartment and pull-out couch to this moment, the struggles, the grief, the small victories, and the unexpected turns. He thought about Sarah, how proud she would be, how she'd probably laugh at the Rolls Royce and the fancy gala but cry happy tears at the scholarship bearing his name. Emma found him there, appearing at his side like she always seemed to when he needed her most. "Ready to go home, Dad?" He looked down at his daughter, this miracle of a person who'd kept him going through the darkest times. "More than ready, sweetheart." He took her hand and they walked back inside together. The Rolls Royce was waiting for them at the entrance, a gift from Richard that Marcus had protested but eventually accepted, understanding that sometimes you had to let people show their appreciation in their own way. The crowd from earlier had dispersed, but a few people were still lingering, still taking photos. Marcus helped Emma into the back seat, and as he walked around to the driver's side, he caught sight of his reflection in the dark blue paint. A man in an expensive suit getting into a car that cost more than he used to make in 5 years. But underneath the suit and the car and the title, he was still Marcus Webb, still the kid who'd worked 3 jobs to help his parents, still the man who'd held his wife's hand as she died, still the father who would do anything for his daughter. He slid behind the wheel and looked at Emma in the rearview mirror. She was already half asleep, the excitement of the evening catching up. As he pulled away from the Grandview Hotel, driving past the same spot where he'd parked his old sedan 6 months ago, he realized something profound. He hadn't changed. Not really. The circumstances had changed, the opportunities had changed, but the core of who he was remained the same. And that, he understood now, was exactly as it should be. Success hadn't transformed him into someone new. It had simply given him the resources to be more fully who he'd always been. A good man. A loving father. Someone who showed up, worked hard, and treated people with dignity and respect. The rest was just details. Just the trappings of fortune and opportunity. What mattered was the foundation, and that foundation had been built long ago, in a small house with parents who taught him integrity, strengthened by a wife who'd believed in him, and renewed every day by a daughter who saw him as her hero. As they drove through the night toward home, Marcus smiled. "That loser single dad will never change," Brandon had said once, years ago. And you know what? He was absolutely right. Marcus Webb would never change, and that was his greatest strength of all.